Hey. All right, everybody. It is Friday, 1 p.m. U.S. Eastern Time. That means it's time for Shally's Alley. I need an echo chamber. Alley. I am so happy and more than happy, whatever is happier than happy, ecstatic to have Mr. Death Star himself, Pete Radloff. Hopefully I said that right.
You
Radloff?
did. Nailed it.
Friend of mine since 2011 or something like that. I think we met at a SourceCon. So we've been friends for nearly a dozen years or so. And super excited to have Pete on the show for a couple of reasons. One of them is he is a sharer like me and loves to get things out there. And I was going to ask you a little bit about that as well. But to give you an idea, he's a board member of HR.com. He's a contributor at Recruiting Daily and HRTX. He's, I think, a board member of Recruit DC or something like that, a founding member or something like that of Recruit DC.
Board member for a long time, yeah.
You're in DC, right?
I am. I'm right outside DC in Northern Virginia.
So, he's a contributor, right? He's somebody that openly shares and gives and gives and gives, and he gives for the reasons of giving, not for the reasons of curating his personality and popularity, right? Because to be honest, he shares the real stuff, and sometimes the real stuff doesn't make you popular. I'm living proof of that.
True.
But Pete has had a pretty diverse background in sourcing. I think we met when he was at a company called Living Social. And so if you think about it, 2011, that was like Living Social before social existed, really.
It was
the beginning of social.
Unique time for sure.
When was Twitter a thing?
It was. I mean, live tweeting was a thing.
Is that when did Twitter become public knowledge, or because I know they're founded in 2006, but it wasn't until a while later it sort of took gained steam. So is that around 2010 or so?
Yeah, I think it was like around 09 or 10, I think, is really when you started to see it, big, and I think really started to kind of take shape.
And you remember Tumblr?
I do remember Tumblr.
What happened to Tumblr?
They locked it down for a myriad different reasons, but
it still exists though?
Still there, yeah, but I mean, I can't tell you that it's on my phone.
I had a Tumblr blog, 2 of them actually. A personal Shally, and then Shally and then sourcing, right? I had a Shally blog and a sourcing one, and I completely forgot about it until just now, and I'm like, I wonder if I can still log into it. It's been logged out for a while. Yeah. But from Living Social, you then worked at a couple of other places, and you were at Amazon for a while. I'm sure that was a super easy job.
Oh, tons. Super easy.
Of course, yeah. I mean, I've heard from lots of people how easy it is there. And then you recently, by that I mean a year or so, ended up at a company called Datadog.
For
those of you that have no idea what that is, it's like when you have a dog that eats data. No, I'm just kidding. What is Datadog?
So basically what they do is all the things that happen in your cloud environment, right, are all things that need to be monitored and be able to have sort of insight into that. And so they provide this observability, monitoring structure, alerting, security events, things like that, all into these sort of one dashboard so everybody can see what's going on in their environment simultaneously.
I see. Data monitoring.
Correct. Yeah. So competitors with Splunk, things like that, really across the board. And I know Splunk had some big news in the last 24 hours. So.
And so, your job is leadership. So technology leadership, recruiting and sourcing, or what's?
Yeah. So our team focuses on everything sort of engineering manager and above for Datadog. So all leadership roles, executive roles, things like that are primary. And for us, that focus is really on the engineering and product management side.
Wow, that's tough. Engineering and product management.
Yeah, it's no small potatoes.
Especially product management. I spent a good number of years, 5 years, at a company that was really big on product first development. It was a fintech company. And I didn't really know. I thought I knew product management before I got there, but I knew kind of like generic product management.
Hmm.
And I had worked on some product management searches, but they were more like maybe I would say on the marketing side. And then when I joined this company, I really had to essentially take a class, a deep dive on technical product management that is not the same as technical project management. And one of the first things that I discovered for myself, and I'm sure other people already knew that with product management, was that the job titles are so way off. I mean, you cannot use product management as a search because you will get everything except the people you want.
Correct. You really need to drill down into some of the specificity around what you're looking for, and then
Yeah.
almost dial that back to that. And I think it was a couple of years back was like the first time I'd ever heard sort of the term of like group product manager, right?
Mhm.
Sort of managing product managers, and that's that was a sort of a good lesson, right? You have to go and you got to source out, you got to search out like what does this look like? Who are these people? Like what is, even going so far as to go to YouTube and like
Right.
explain product management to idiots, right? And I think there's some of that I had to do to really kind of understand like, what is this and what am I looking for.
Yeah. Yeah. And I found the Pragmatic Institute, and they have the product management framework,
Hmm.
the pragmatic product management specifically for technology. And so that was a huge difference, right?
Right.
And that whole pragmatic product management framework really solidified. I took their framework and I printed it out and I had it on my um, cubicle wall. We still had offices back then,
Yeah.
and it really helped me understand. You could it goes from like market, big picture, all the way to support,
Right.
basically the day to day. And then it goes strategic and tactical, sort of. But if you can draw a circle and circle an area of it, you could do like market strategy over here, you could do enablement and execution over here, and it really kind of brings together the different areas of it. It was way better to look for those kinds of things than it was product management, because inevitably I would get people that were marketing. And how ironic is it that a product manager doesn't manage a product and they don't manage people? They sometimes manage people if they're a group product manager, but
Sure.
product managers don't manage individuals. They manage projects, sort of,
Well,
but
I,
not
I think
really.
I think it depends on the company, right? And I've seen
Right. In
sort
the
of
pragmatic,
two
yeah,
angles of that, right? And I know that a lot of times for the stuff I'm looking for today, it involves like what does strategy and ideation look like? Then the
yeah.
go to market
Roadmap,
strategy,
roadmap, yep.
MVP, then sort of the customer sticky factor, right? And making sure that you get adoption there, and you then, to your point, fold
What
that
they
into
pay,
support.
and then what do they want? What are they paying for?
And also, when you have an MVP, like giving it to a customer so you can figure out like what works and what doesn't work, so you can go back to the drawing board on some of those things before you go full GA on something.
It's a really broad definition of work, kind of like recruiting.
No doubt. Yeah.
There's product management in recruiting, because you're managing projects, you're managing candidates, you're managing hiring managers, but you don't really manage anybody necessarily unless you're a manager of recruiters. But yeah, so that was a huge learning lesson for me, and I definitely learned a lot about business because of the perspective of the product manager being sort of in the middle between engineering, marketing, sales, and all that stuff. So it's a
Yeah.
pretty neat field, but it's tough to search for.
It is. It's tough to search for it.
Yeah.
It's just that, I think that's, the front end work that you do and figuring out what it is that we're actually looking for.
Yep.
That's why those meetings are important.
Man, is the intake, it's like the kickoff and intake is super necessary in that.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. So the reason I was super excited to get you on the show is I had a couple of questions I wanted to talk to you, and I want to let folks know. So Pete has a degree in psychology, and we wanted to talk about the psychology of what we do. Just because I wanted to finally give Pete a chance to actually use his degree. No, I'm just kidding.
Me too.
Um, so talking about the psychology of sourcing,
Yeah.
do you feel like sometimes our job is, whether it's full stack sourcing or sourcing is part of our job as recruiters, but the whole mentality and psychology of sourcing is, um, rather peripatetic, unique. It's almost like defined by its own self. So what I mean is sourcing is a very different job,
Sure.
but it's part of recruiting. However, it's like this other. It combines part science, part intuition, part art,
Yeah.
and I think part psychology. Like, do you? I guess the question I'm trying to ask is, do you feel like sourcers are armchair psychologists?
I think they have to be to a certain degree, right? Because you have a number of different personalities that you're trying to understand slash manage, right? It's the candidate personality and who you're talking to and sort of what motivates them and what drives them as not just as a candidate, but as a human. In the same token, you're doing the same thing with a hiring manager, right? And if it's somebody you've worked with 100 times, that maybe that's a little bit easier for you. But that first time, it's really understanding like what are their, I hate to use hot buttons, but like what are their hot buttons? What is the way they think? What are their sort of inherent biases that they may or may not know that they have? And then I think that there's also a third angle to it that we don't talk about a lot, is the psychology of self, right? As a recruiter or
Yeah.
sourcer, you have to think about from your own perspective, your self-awareness, your how do you communicate? Are you doing it in a way that sort of resonates with people? I think so. There's sort of this trinity that you have to sort of attend to from a psychological perspective to do what we do.
So you got the understanding of the hiring manager's psychology and predispositions. You got to and if you're working with a recruiter, you have that psychology.
Mhm.
Then you have the candidate's perspective, and something that you said, the candidate as a whole self. Explain that.
Yeah, I mean, I think you have to think about what it looks like for somebody that you're going after. Not just a collection of keywords on a resume or their comp structure or things like that, right? I think one of the things, this is a sort of peripheral example of this, but I think it's an important one. Um, when there's a big layoff at a company, the chum is in the water. Everybody's out there. A Google sheet gets put out there. A layoff, the emails and the contact information for people on a layoff, and the chum is in the water and people are approaching it. And what I wonder sometimes, and I take this into account when I do my own messaging to people who have been recently part of a layoff or a riff or something like that, is there's a mindset that that person is in a layoff, and that messaging can't be the standard message.
Mostly, ugh.
Yeah,
Mostly this mindset right here.
empathy is an important part when you can craft that message to somebody who's just been hit in a round of 4,000 people laid off, right? Um, or when you're talking to somebody who's early on in their career and really understanding what they do or what they want to do. I think that's something that we need to kind of take into account. But from our own perspective, it's about reading cues. It's about understanding tonality. It's about, and some of that's hard in email, right? And so a lot of this plays into account when you're on the phone with somebody. I think in making sure that even when we get to the point where we talk about what's going to happen next, right? When they know what to expect at each stage of the process and we communicate that efficiently, like
Yeah,
there's some psychological comfort,
that
there's some
puts people at
safety in that.
ease
It
in a
reduces
big way.
yeah, it reduces fear of the unknown.
Yeah.
Even something as simple as when I message them in my invite to them, it's, hey, I'm going to be calling from this number in case it goes into spam. Like you'll
Oh
come,
no way, I do that. Oh my
yes,
god, I thought I was the only one.
no, we all block spam on our phone. I
No,
don't
no, I mean I say that. I'm like, hey, this is the number I'm going to call you from.
Yep,
I message them with that just because of that, because I think sometimes they don't. Well, everybody plays caller ID
sure,
on their phone. I can't wait for caller ID on cellular to actually finally be a reality. But that's why I tell them that, because like and sometimes I'm calling them from my VoIP line and not my cell phone. So
yes.
that's, yeah. Sorry, keep going.
No, that's okay. I think it's those kinds of things. It's never easy to be we've all done it. We've been in a candidate's shoes, right, and interviewing for a job, and there's a lot of intensity in that whole process. And so the little things that we can do to sort of alleviate some of those stressors or some of those worries,
Fear.
I think are really important. And I think we sort of overlook that because we're thinking about metrics and numbers and how do we contact and how do we get the person on the horn. Like, but even how you approach them and what's in that messaging, and something as simple as, hey,
Yeah.
I realize that you've been there for 9 years and Rome's probably not on fire, but here's why I want to talk to you. rather than like, I have this job. Like, that's great that you have this job, but like, here's why I want to talk to you is much more resonant than here's why
Right.
you need to talk to me.
Yeah. Understand the perspective and the empathy that you need to have, like you said, in order to. And by the way, this applies also to the recruiter. As a sourcer, if you're at the beginning of that process, the front of the funnel, and bringing in candidates, the recruiters could feel threatened by that. So there's also a psychology of taking away or trying to minimize the fear from the recruiter's point of view that you're a threat to them, minimize the fear from the candidate's point of view that is inherent in even thinking about a job change. Job change is like one of the top three most stressful, most fearsome activities that
Absolutely.
we do, along with like public speaking and getting married or relocating your home and things like that. So understanding that and just simply being aware of it and being empathetic. So we are essentially playing armchair psychologist to the hiring manager, to the recruiter, to the candidate, but to ourself as well, right?
Sure. And I think part of that too is, it's about, it's hard to saying you have to develop your own communication style is very sort of carte blanche. It kind of captures everything. But I think we really need to think about like finding a voice when we talk to people, because, if they're very casual in their communications, we should be casual. Mirroring is a
Right.
very
Mirroring. Yep.
important,
Right.
psychological
And you
component.
can do that electronically too.
You can totally do that electronically, but you have to really, instead of just reading it, you have to sort of interpret it. And I know that that's hard on text or email sometimes, but you have to take the best chance that you can to be able to do that in order to, kind of get somebody in the mindset. And sometimes it's the basic stuff of like, when you reach out and it's Friday, like starting out the email with happy Friday, that shows a little bit of human, a little bit of a human aspect to what we're doing, rather than just like, I hope this email finds you well. Like, I don't know that an email has ever found me well. Like, I don't know what that means. But I know what Happy Friday means, and that's a soft
Right.
intro, for that. And I think, and again, this comes back to sort of looking at profiles of people and resumes too, of, looking at the little intricacies, like what do they do in their spare time? Like, I'd love to connect with people who put those hobbies on the bottom and they're talking about playing guitar. And I've struggled with that, myself. And, or, I see somebody who's got stuff about pizza on there. And in my profile is, I am always happy about to talk about the intricacies of pizza. You
Oh,
know,
so you don't work it into the message like, I'd like to talk to you about a slice of opportunity.
yeah, no, I did. I gave up on the corny stuff years ago, unless there's something just so obvious that I can play that into it, in a what feels like a normal way. There's a difference between trying to force fit it and to be able to, kind of shape it in a way that makes sense.
Yeah. The messaging, the psychology of messaging, um, definitely is part of, I think, and not just the psychology of messaging, but the adaptability of it and the flexibility of it,
Like,
mirroring or understanding your audience. I wrote an article about the peripatetic recruiter and the peripatetic sourcer, and then that means it's kind of in the Socratic school of philosophy. It's living amongst the people that you're observing and participating in the community. So rather than like the old fashioned lurk before you post, it's more like lurk and hang out and understand the subculture before you get involved, and when you get involved, um, act like a native in that subculture, act like a resident in that, not just an observer. And I think there's a lot of psychology involved in that we probably didn't even realize.
well,
Uh,
they call it reading the room for a reason, right? And that isn't always just in a physical
right,
location
that's a
sense, right?
good
But
point.
that is just reading into sort of what somebody's trying to convey, through their profile or through a message back to you or whatever the case is. I think that that's important.
tell me Tell me about imposter syndrome. I kind of struggle with that myself in a couple of different ways, but you talked a little bit about that. Tell me more about imposter syndrome and what are your thoughts on it? How are you thinking about it?
So for all of the the talk out there about, balancing your work life with your personal life and all that. And I know this doesn't attribute to everybody, but I think that there is, and I know it is for me, there is definitive level of self-worth, a sense of self-worth, I think, that is wrapped up in who you are in your job and your career, right? And whether that's, you're trying to climb ladder title wise or what have you, it doesn't have to be like that, but it is difficult to get out of the mindset of like, well, how is what I'm contributing going to make a difference, right? And when you do that, there's a lot of people putting out the same things out there, and you're like, well, how is what I'm putting out there going to be any different? But I think that there's a level that we have to kind of self-actualize that, well, the way that I'm saying it or the way that I'm putting it out there might resonate with somebody that the other thing doesn't resonate with at all. But it's hard to get over the idea of like, wow, that was a really good article. I could never write anything like that. But I think, part of that is you have to.
Isn't that kind of envy though?
Yes and no. I think there's envy / admiration. Right.
Envyration.
I think envy can both be good and bad. I think that there's something you take away from each thing that you read, right? Whether that's good or bad or indifferent. But I think, there's a certain point where you just have to jump off the ledge, and if it lands, it lands. And if it doesn't, okay, maybe the next thing will land. I think that there's a component to that fear is a crippling thing, and particularly
Absolutely.
in
Yeah.
this profession, I think everybody assumes that all recruiters are extroverts, and that is so not the freaking
Not
case,
it.
right?
Definitely not it.
But I think that there's a place for the extrovert and the introvert in that, right? But I think it's harder as maybe an introvert to get past the imposter syndrome. But I think I'm more or less an extrovert, but I suffer from it all the time. Like, am I going to be able to put something out there that actually resonates with people?
Yeah, especially when you have. So maybe at first, if you're just getting started, there's not a whole lot of risk because you
Yep.
write something and it's new. But once you've gotten a reputation for your content being, you know, funny or satirical or charny and smarmy, or whatever, and then you're like, oh my god, am I going to be able to, like, can I maintain this? Can I maintain the funny? Can I maintain the smart? Can I maintain
Right.
the whatever? And so there's this fear of, why bother putting it out there if there's so much other stuff, and a lot of these stuff is good, and I wish I had written it. So maybe I just don't really want to write because I'm afraid that I don't have anything new, different, better to say that might compete with what I already said or what other people are saying, you
Well,
know?
yeah, and I mean, a fundamental component of cognitive behavioral therapy is self-talk, right? And the voice that you put into your head is the voice that's going to speak back to you in your head. And that can take years to reshape and to reframe as you go throughout your career, right? And I think it's probably easier in the beginning to get past it because you don't know what you don't know. I think as you've gone through the years and seen more and more things, some of that gets into your head, and to think about like, what do you really know, and what value are you contributing, right? But I think part of that too is making sure you've got folks in your sphere that you can trust to say, hey, I'm thinking about putting this out there, read through it and blow it up for me. And fortunately, I've got a lot of those people that are willing to take some of that stuff and blow it up for me before I put it out there.
Okay, some good advice there.
But I
So
will.
why bother?
Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, you why do you share what you know? I guess is the why do you share?
So there's a couple of reasons. One, not a single person that's watching this right now is sitting there with a bachelor's degree in recruiting. So there's no way for any of us to walk out and come out educated to say, oh, I already know more than somebody who's been doing this for 5 years. I think the other piece of it is I have, over the course of 23, 24 years, I've had the chance to have some really spectacular mentors and people who have given me their time and their brain power and their conversation over the years to sort of bring me to where I am. I have tried as best as I can to play that forward in my career, and making sure I spend time with the folks who are coming up, spend time with the folks who are interested in knowing more, because I've gone the management route a couple of times. Each time I've done it, I've gotten 6 months in and be like, I hate this crap. But I really enjoy mentoring folks. I really enjoy sharing what I know, sharing, here's how you fall down, here's how you get back up, or hey, have you thought about this? Hey, have you thought about that? That's why I share. I don't give a crap about clicks, man. That doesn't do anything for me. All that means is I'm just going to have to manage more crap in a LinkedIn inbox a week from now. It's nice to have eyeballs for sure, but for example, speaking at SourceCon, I think it was back in 2017 or 2018. I don't need to be on the stage. I'm very comfortable behind the curtain, because behind the curtain is where the machine is, right?
Oh, I hate being on the stage. I get so nervous. Butterflies, I get cotton mouth, the whole works.
Right. It's the same reason I coach youth soccer, right? Like my playing days are long behind me and my body is shot. But I can impart the critical pieces and the fun pieces and the life lessons that go into something like that. And I think, what we do for a living isn't terribly different than that. What we learn in this profession is so much by doing rather than, I would say, getting it out of a book. But now I sit here with like 5 books of really good friends of mine who have all, present company included, with books here that I've read and gone, my God, that's brilliant. Like, how have I not thought about that
Oh,
before?
hold on. Did you just compliment my book? Because I missed that.
I did.
I was like, oh, wait, he's talking about my book.
On the
Oh,
show.
thanks, man. Appreciate that.
Yeah.
Appreciate that. Well, so I share a lot less these days, partly because I dedicate what what little time I had available to writing articles and creating content, and posting and things like that. When I have that time available, I'm using it to create courses
Right.
that go into my library, or I do the show, and the show is it's 2 or 3 hours a week of commitment. So this is kind of my way of sharing, is by highlighting people like you and bringing, in some cases, I mean, you're a celebrity, so I'm not doing you any favors, but there's people on the show that have been guests that were relatively unknown, and I love to be able to give them a stage to share their ideas and their philosophies and do exactly what you said, right?
Yep.
um, Show what they know so others can learn. So that's why I don't do it a lot. But I'll tell you that when I started, I was the first to create a newsletter about sourcing. It was called Cyber Sleuthing in 1996, and it was an email newsletter. I had no idea how many eyeballs were on it because it was an email newsletter. All I knew was my email list grew, but that was just because people were subscribing to the newsletter. I didn't know if anybody read it.
Right.
But years later, and I mean like 10 years, 15 years later, I still have folks that, even today say, I remember your newsletter or stuff like that. So I had no idea how many people I was reaching, but I was definitely reaching people because later on I found out about that. Then I transitioned to, I was myself and Levy and one other person were the first bloggers ever on the, in sourcing and in recruiting, generally speaking. We were the first 3 bloggers on ERE, and I was blogging a lot. And then I did see the eyeballs and the comments, and there was only 3 of us, so the comments were focused on the 3 of us. And then there were 20, and then there were 100, and then the comments dwindled. But by then I had already switched to another medium, and I wrote a book, and then I wrote another book, and then I wrote a 3rd book. And after writing the 4th book, which I think finally is the book that I meant to write, it was a book that I always wanted to write.
Mm-hmm.
I can honestly say I'm done writing books. I have no idea how many copies have sold. I have no idea how many people it's influenced. So what I'm trying to tell you is, from the beginning, I didn't really care how many eyeballs were on the newsletter. And then with the blog, I wasn't blogging to get comments. It just happened because it was one of the first ones. And then later with LinkedIn and all that other stuff, I've never really been, it's never really been about people seeing it. It's never really been about getting popular. It's always been this urge, this underlying need, almost like a disease. Like I have to get it out.
Yep.
Right. And so now that I have other outlets, the courses and this, I don't have that need to write as much anymore, the pathological need to write. Maybe I'm sick in that way, but do you feel like that? Do you feel like you have to get the word out? Is that part of the motivation?
Um, I think there's a couple of different ways I can do that. I think, contributing thoughtful comments to things that other people put out there, or sort of resonating those things, I think is helpful. Um, I've got an arm's length list of stuff I want to put out there, and probably all of it is within, all of it is 60 to 70% complete. It's not all done, but I think, I don't feel the need to do it, but I think there
Yeah.
are things I'm passionate about that I want to um, that I really want to sort of convey, right? And I think that the psychology of sourcing is one of those things. Like we've spent 10, 15 years on tactical and engagement and Boolean and all that, and that's great. Um, but those are only one component of what we do. The other component at the end of the day, and I know the AI haters are going to come for me for this, but like the end of the day, this is still a human to human connection, right? And I'm sure maybe that fades at some point. I don't know. Your guess is as good as mine. But I think until that moment comes, the human component and the sort of mindset and the psychological piece of this, of how we interact with people, how we engage people, how we treat people, is going to still be paramount until the day comes where the machine does it all, if that's going to ever happen.
Hmm.
And I don't know that we're necessarily talking about that as much. I still see a lot about, and some of this comes through, I think, a little bit in, there's threads of this that come through in employer branding. There's threads of this that come through like the DEI conversations. But I feel like a lot of the times they're talking about it and then they sort of go outside of the important psychological piece of this, back to the tactical. It's this ideation, skip the psychological, back to the
Back
tactical.
to the tactical. Well,
And
sticking to the psychological, then the fear is the psychological, and the fear is that the robots will replace us, right? And so this goes back to probably even before Henry Ford, I'm sure. But then an example that I can think of, at least academically from my studies, was that there was this fear that the Ford method, the assembly line, would replace the skilled workers, and it would displace them, and they would then be unemployed and unemployable. What actually ended up happening was that the robots, but back then they weren't the robots that we know today, but the machines were not, they didn't replace humans just had to learn how to use them.
right.
And so humans that were replaced were the humans that didn't learn how to use the robot. So if you think about that, that is the same with any tool, right? If
Yeah,
a tool is created and the artisan or whatever doesn't know how to use that tool, there's reason to fear it, because they're not going to be able to keep up. The same thing is happening with AI. So there's this fear that AI is going to replace us, but it won't. What'll happen is it'll replace the people that aren't able to learn how to use this new tool, whether it's true AI or not. I don't want to even get into that, but you know what I mean.
yeah, that's a whole different discussion. But
Right.
a chat GPT is only as good as the prompt that the human puts into it,
That
right?
the what puts into
Human
it.
puts into it, right? And
Yeah, the one that's being replaced. No, not I don't
yeah,
think so.
so for all of the like AI is going to replace us, and again, this is a whole other diatribe we can go into, but like for all the AI is going to replace us. As soon as somebody comes up with an ATS that can tell the difference between a Word and a PDF document and parse it accurately, then I'll start worrying about my job. Until then, I'm not worried about that. Like we're
Didn't Resumex do that in like 2001 or something?
sure, but it's 2023 and I'm still
And
getting,
now they don't do it.
we still can't do it. Right.
We
So
did it in 2001, and now we can't do it anymore.
right. So I think again, it has its place, right? You can certainly drive your car, but you can still walk if you want to, right? There's still a place for that. And I think again, with the AI piece is going to miss, and I don't want to make this a whole AI thing, so I'll stop after this. But like, I think that it's not going to be. It doesn't necessarily include empathy. It doesn't necessarily include sort of sense of understanding or reasoning when you're putting a messaging out there. You're having a conversation with somebody to understand. Hey, I can't reload because I've got a 15-year-old kid in high school, and if I move right now, they won't talk to me till after college, right? Like those kinds of things aren't going to be able to be replaced like that. And those are the things that only the machine of the human brain can really sort of synthesize and think about: right answer, wrong answer, good response, bad response. And I think that is, I think that that's something that we really need to make sure we keep at the forefront of this.
That's really good. I
It's a
like that.
complement to the tactical, right? It's not one or the
Yes.
other. It's a
Right.
complement to the tactical.
Right. Yeah, I think somebody said human plus. Right.
Yep.
Yeah. That's a good point. So, one thing machines can't do, or AI or language models or whatever, is the mirroring that you were talking about, right? Um, and the reading and interpreting and things like that. They can interpret what's being said, but I'm not sure that sentiment analysis is quite at the point where you can really distinguish um, snark from irony, or whether someone's happy writing it or whatever.
Sure.
So there's that. You had talked about the generalization bias, or the dangers of generalization bias, and I think that's something that we, because it's definitely related to psychology, we need to touch on.
Yep.
In particular, when we make overgeneralizations, like for example, you gave me an example of, you said, last two or three candidates that we interviewed from XYZ company were terrible, therefore everybody from XYZ company is terrible, so we're going to avoid recruiting from there.
Right.
Tell me a little bit about that. How did we get there, and how do we defeat that? Because it is definitely damaging to everybody but the three people that didn't do well in interviews.
Yeah, and I think there's some level of heuristics there that play into it, right? And I think it's that heuristics bias. I think you can sort of almost intertwine the two of those, right? And I think that there is this sort of like, oh well, the last three people from AAA company, they were bad, so like everybody there must be bad. Well, the company's still in business, so everybody can't be bad, right? Or you know, Twitter had a layoff. Up, tech markets in
Oh
Seattle.
yeah, right, right. Twitter and Google had layoffs, therefore the entire technology market is going under. But lots of companies are still hiring. So
Right. And
yeah,
I think what we need to keep in mind is that, a company is a collection of people, right? People are not the company that necessarily. And I don't know if I'm saying that correctly, but I think you see where I'm going with that. And I think we have to sort of avoid some of this overlay of like, oh, well, one thing happened, so it's terrible. If we've learned anything in this industry is that, you know, it all comes back around. It's all cyclical and it all comes back around, right? Like recruiter hot summer was 18 months ago and everybody was moving and everybody was getting paid and now it's down again. And then 18 months from now, it will probably be very different again. And I think we have to sort of not just take the headline, but we have to really sort of read the whole article and understand, that there is more to this, and what goes up comes down and vice versa. So, to say that like, oh, talk to these two engineers and they're terrible. I don't want to talk to anybody else from there. Like, well, what about the really freaking smart engineer who's just desperate to get out of that place because they're stifled, right? Are we missing that person because we're looking at the title and not the article?
right, right. Or likewise, the attraction to hiring managers. So we're definitely missing out on people because we're leaving them behind, because we're making these generalizations, but also we're missing out on other people because we're focusing on these companies. Like, how often do you go to a hiring manager and say, what kind of candidates do you want, or what companies do you want us to target? And it's always Google, Microsoft, Facebook, Netflix.
Right.
It's
And
like, why? I mean,
that's the
it
first question. Why?
yeah, why? That's the question I ask, and it's hilarious sometimes the answers that I get. But the best example I can give you is I dug into this with a hiring manager, and I said why, and they started telling me about the quality of their training program and their interview process, and how people who make the bar there are definitely, it's a factor that designates a quality, or whatever. And I let them just kind of keep going, and then I jumped in and I said, this was some time ago, so it doesn't apply anymore. But I jumped in and I said, okay, but you understand, the reason I'm hesitating here, and the reason I'm having a hard time kind of grasping this, is because we develop in C++ and they develop in this other language. We're writing for Windows and they're writing for this other. So like, there's no, are they even going to pass the interview? Are the skills the same?
Right.
And the hiring manager was like, Well, I mean, I don't know if they can, if they can program in this or they can learn it. I'm like, okay, so now we're making exceptions for people. Normally, we would make sure that they have to have 10 years of C++, but now if they come from this company, then they don't have to have 10 years of C++. How does that work?
Right. Well, and I think part of that too is, they say, "Oh, I don't want them from this company," because if they worked at this company, it means they've hit the bar, or it means they figured out how to game the system through the interview process, right? I mean, it's not terribly
They were a
difficult
good
to
fit for that
find.
company. How about that? How about they just worked really well? A culture fit and whatever. It's
Right.
not it. Like you said, it's an overgeneralization that's going to hurt other candidates that are more qualified, but they didn't work at that company.
And the same can be said of recruiters, like, oh, well, they haven't recruited for this before. All right. Well, at the end of the day, you know, the house is shaped the same, the walls may be painted differently, right? You figure out how to do, you figure out how to do that. I had no experience recruiting lawyers and paralegals earlier in my career. Figured it out though. I didn't know what Kubernetes was 4.5 years ago, but a stupid YouTube video that was a cartoon taught me everything I needed to know in 8 minutes.
Wow.
So I think that it is, part of that, I think too is, and we talked a little about mirroring with those hiring managers, like, understand the things that motivate them when they look at a candidate, and when you're giving that information to them about the candidate, make sure you're including some of those things that they called out as far as wanting that.
Hmm.
I think that's making sure I don't want to say using playback, but almost kind of playing back the words. If I had somebody that did this, that would be great. And you give them somebody that did that, and they're like, well, I don't really like how they did this. But you said if they had somebody that did this, that would be a good fit. So why does the company matter now?
Right.
And I think that that'll help them think of, well, I did say that. Okay, you know what?
Right.
Let's have the conversation, right? And so
Right. Okay. So you have to push back. So what you're saying is that the way to reverse that or combat that when you know that you are doing the best job you can is to essentially, or one of the ways is to essentially kind of feedback what they said, right? So
yes,
recall the intake, the kickoff, as a way to remind them that we're looking for a specific thing that isn't that new thing that they just told us about.
correct.
I like that. That's good feedback. I don't even know if I call that feedback. It's like playback is not it. Feedback is not it. There's a word for that
Right.
somewhere.
There is a term for it. I actually have a note because while I'm putting some of that together, I'm actually have a note to figure out what the term actually is for that.
We'll figure it out. We'll do it on the next show.
Yep.
Definitely. Um, great. So we talked a lot about psychology in different ways. Um, and just I didn't want to let you go without asking you the couple of questions that I always ask. I'm sure you probably already heard.
Yeah.
So my second to last question is, who should be on the show next?
So anticipating this, I thought about who have I worked with that, gosh, I would love to see them on a show, or that haven't been out there, who's doing really interesting stuff. And
Yeah, that's exactly what I want. Yep.
yeah, there's a guy that I worked with at Amazon, Adam Kovach. Might be one of 5 smartest people I've ever met in my life. Hell of a recruiter. I think sort of didn't want to do that anymore, but found like the analytical part of his brain. I think what uses his brain best has now come to the forefront, right? And that's talent intelligence, and all of that information around sort of like, how do you know what to go and find before you have it on
Ooh.
your desk, right? And he's nailed this, and he's been an integral part of like putting the sourcing 7 back on the map out in the Pac Northwest. And I think just somebody that I can sit and watch and listen to, that every time he says something, I'm like, gosh, that's okay. That's a really good idea. Or I come out with something, he's like, whoa, man, have you thought about this? And the people that make you think are the people that I want to hear from.
Yeah, absolutely. That's who I want to hear from. So definitely, we're going to seek them out and invite them.
Awesome.
Yeah. So he's at Microsoft now.
No, when he left Amazon, he went out and started his own sort of consulting business
Okay.
right now. So he's been doing some of that. And again, he spent a lot of time in the last couple of months, like revamping and relaunching Sourcing 7 out there, which I think is great. I think these like local communities, like those go through ebb and flows too. So it's really nice to see the wheels turning with a new generation of folks doing that.
Okay, it's Kovachh.
KOVACS.
Oh, ACS. Okay,
Yep.
got it. Thanks for clarifying that.
Yep.
Cool. All right, and then so the last question is a lot of folks watch this replay over the weekend, so I like to give them something to sink their teeth into. Is there something you can leave them with to think about, a thought provoker, right? To gnaw on over the weekend. What would you part the audience with that would make them think?
I think, for those of us that are spending time actually talking to candidates, I know that that's not everybody's bailiwick, but I think for those of us that are talking to people, I think the next time you get off that phone call, sort of reflect back on what the conversation you had, but like what are the things that aren't in your notes that are going to go to the hiring manager that stick out to you about that person? What were the things that they said, or things that, like, the tonality of some of the things they said? Like, think about those things before you go and do that write up. Think about what you could have said differently to make a different connection personally with that person, or did you leave them with a sense of like, gosh, they know exactly what's coming next, right? Like, some of those things, I think it's the 30-second or 90-second reflection after that call, while it's still fresh in the mind. I would encourage people to think about that.
Okay. Wow. Wonderful. Man, it's been great.
Awesome, man.
Really appreciate you being on the show.
Thanks for having me, dude. This has been super helpful.
Yeah, I'd love to have you back. We're starting to do some encores for sure, especially as we start looking into specific topics. I love talent analytics, and well, actually you called it talent intelligence.
Yeah.
So yeah, but talent analytics, talent intelligence, I think there's a difference. It's a nuance, but there's a difference. However, that's kind of what I'm doing nowadays. In my role, um, I oversee all people analytics, and so very interesting topic for me personally. And I think a lot of folks that are in sourcing might find that an interesting um, topic to either transition into or also do or whatever. So I appreciate that. Well, thanks a lot for being here,
Thanks, man.
everybody. It's Shally's Alley. We will see you next Friday, same time, and be kind to each other. Take care.